Welcome back to the Beat the Often Path podcast. I'm your host, Ross Palmer. On this show, we showcase unusual success stories because unusual times call for unusual stories, and we all need to think outside the box about how we make money and what success even looks like. My guest today is Devin Jamrose, my college roommate at Colorado College, somebody I've known since forever and a day. And who would have guessed back then that he would create his own CBD coffee startup called Steep Fuse, and that he would sell that startup to none other than Willie Nelson of all people. I know, it's a true story, and it's wacky and it's wild. In this episode, he shares the ups and the downs of what it takes to start a successful product-based business with all of the heartache and scary stories and just everything you can imagine. It's candid, it's honest, it's open, it's real. And above all, Devin is just a great guy with a great sense of humor. I think there's so much here for people who want to take a chance on a product or an idea and they don't know how. So I'm really, really excited to introduce my next guest, Devin Jamrose, founder of Steep Fuse Coffee. All right, Devin, welcome to the podcast. You are officially going to be my sixth viewer of the podcast.
I thought I was the sixth guest, but you know.
Same thing. No,
I'm glad you paid me in advance.
Yeah, don't try to cash that check until Friday, please.
Fair enough.
Welcome to the show, Devin. I see you look very professional there, gearing up.
I've been told you look more professional drinking out of a coffee cup than a can of beer when doing professional interviews.
I can see no harm in that.
Cheers.
Cheers to you as well. Well, thank you for agreeing to come on. Obviously, we have a ton of history together, but for those who don't know your wacky little world, tell everybody the bird's eye view of your life professionally.
Life professionally. Well, I would say that my professional life started about 2 months ago, but my journey, if you will, started. This little journey started in 2014. When I started, at the time I was growing cannabis in my basement. It is legal here in Colorado, for those of your listeners who may not know that. And I wasn't very good at it. I grew mediocre weed, and which meant that I had a lot of trimmings and clippings and offcuts that I could use for getting into infusion and extraction to make. Started making tinctures and stuff. And so at that time, I was painting houses. And one winter, I took a real nasty fall snowboarding and herniated some discs in my back. And I got put on all the nasties, the Vicodin, Percocet, all the horrible opioid painkillers that nobody wants to be on. And they made me really sick. They really messed with
nobody
my life.
wants to be on them.
Nobody.
None of Middle America wants to be on them. But go on.
Fair enough. If you were to poll all of the population of this country, nobody would say they wanted any Vicodin.
None.
So as a way to get off of the nasties, for a while, my morning routine was I would basically wake up, unable to move, reach over to my bedside table, take a handful of pills, swallow those, put a heating pad under my back, and then wait an hour for them to kick in so that I could even get up. And then it was a game of beat the clock of, can I get food in my stomach before I puke?
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
that's everybody's favorite game.
I know. If you haven't tried it, it's a great weight loss strategy. But
God, I gotta hurry up.
But so what I started doing was using the buds that I was growing and making alcohol-based tinctures, and I started taking that instead of the opiates, and that I found worked better for the pain. It didn't make me sick at all, and it worked. It was great. It was also a lot cheaper than the prescriptions. But it did make me, the dose I needed to deal with the pain also made me super duper high. So I couldn't go back to work. So I was still in this weird circle of like, I could be semi-functional, but there's no way I could go on a job site and like be up on a second story ladder painting a house.
Right.
So I got into roasting coffee at the time, and I was roasting coffee at home just on a little stove top, like popcorn popper, actually, one of those little whirly pops. I modified one into a coffee roaster. So like a little thermometer on it and some other little gizmos. And that became the morning routine. Instead of the pain pill game was tincture and coffee roasting. And then sort of had this aha moment of the two things I start my day with every day could maybe be combined into one thing. And so I started infusing, or attempting to infuse the coffee beans with the THC to make a cannabis infused coffee. And that has what set off what became the journey of the last 5 years and the start and sale of a business.
Pretty incredible. And as luck would have it, I'm actually drinking out of that cup. It is a pure coincidence. I can assure you, it really isn't something that was planned. It is actually a random coincidence that I'm drinking out of a Steep Fuse cup given to me as swag at some point in this journey several years ago, I guess.
Yeah. I think that was back when I
don't even think I have the lid for it anymore.
I think that was back when I was begging you to build my first website for free. So
that's right.
But yeah,
how things have changed.
And Steep Fuse is the name of the company that I started with my then housemate, Ben Glennon, who we were living together, and we started trying the experimentation together to sort of make that a thing.
Okay, so you're laid up in bed, you're trying this, you have an aha moment, you're thinking of combining these two things, tincture plus coffee. You don't know how it's going to work, but you have this idea. At what point do you decide you're going to go pro with it? Or when did it become when did you say I want to make a business out of this and not just something for me? And why?
So it stayed as a passion project for a really long time. Because this was 2014, sort of becoming 2015. So Amendment 64 in Colorado had passed, and cannabis businesses, if you will, were just blowing up. You know, we had more dispensaries than Starbucks around that time. And so
I didn't know that.
It was crazy. And like 90% of them are already shut.
Right.
But it is brutal out there. And so there was an impetus, there was the idea of making, some sort of business element to it. And it was more just an idea of, it would be really cool if this could be a business. But we were sort of, as 2015 progressed, it sort of became apparent that if you wanted to, they way cracked down on dispensary licenses, and they really, really, really cracked down on MIPS licenses, which is a marijuana infused products license. So it wasn't terribly hard to get into retail at that time, but it was really, really, really expensive to get into manufacturing. And so, and the coffee didn't work. At the time it was, I had told Ben about the idea. He thought it was cool. So we started playing around with it. And there was this idea that if it could become something that worked really well, maybe we would consider trying to turn it into a real business. But then most of 2015 was just a year of burning coffee and ruining it with nasty weed juice. We were, at the time, what we were doing was we were roasting the coffee in the popcorn popper, and there's just smoke billowing out of that. Like, coffee smokes like crazy when it's roasting, and we had an exhaust fan on the kitchen over the stove.
When you're doing it right, or when you're burning it?
It
always smokes like crazy.
But even when you're doing it right, you have to cook a lot of stuff out of the bean, so it's a real smoky process. But then what we do is we take the popcorn popper, run out the kitchen, out to the back porch while still spinning it so the beans didn't burn, smoke billowing in the house, and we dump it into a colander. And I'd shake the colander really fast while Ben would use like a hairspray bottle full of essentially Green Dragon weed vodka, and he'd spray the beans while I'm shaking them. And it was a silly process, and it didn't work at all.
Okay. Because the goal was at this point to infuse the beans themselves. I mean, that was the idea. So rather than put the liquids together in liquid form, you really wanted to do this in dry form. Why was that the idea?
When I was getting into the roasting, I was really, even though I wasn't roasting very good coffee, I was developing an appreciation for it, and learning more about it. And I kind of realized that if it wasn't going to be the whole beans, then I didn't want to do it at all. And at the time, the sort of water-soluble liquid additives, there was nothing like that then. Nobody was powderizing cannabinoids.
Right.
It was all like you could buy extract. That was about it in oil form. And people were just like the only product that existed at the time, which we didn't even know about then. And actually, I don't think it came out till maybe a year later, but it was basically K-cups that had a blob of THC, like hash oil, in the ground in the K-cup. And grody. And like, it didn't dissolve in the water. It tasted horrible. I didn't even know about it or try it till many years later. And then during the experimentation time, a company in Washington called Legal came out with a cold brew infused coffee. And I was at the point where I really wanted it to be, because for me, part of the experience with the coffee was how ritualistic it had become. In the morning, I would roast it, grind it, brew it. And I know a lot of people are just throwing the K-cup, don't give a damn. And whatever. But for a lot of people, even that little simple piece is part of the morning ritual. Like, you train your brain to know that when you do this stuff,
it's work time.
This reward will come to you of your tasty coffee.
For me, it's 2 French presses every morning.
Yeah, exactly. Like, everybody's got their way. And so it was really cool
grind the beans.
Really cool to make it a way that you had, you make it and you get the best coffee that way. And so we had some batches where we would just spray copious amounts and you would totally get an effect. The coffee would be bong water coffee. Like, you might as well have brewed bong water, but the effect.
That's a very accurate description for people who, I wonder how much of our audience is intimately familiar with the taste of bong water.
I know.
Bong water? What is this? What is this show?
Ben's going to cringe when he sees this episode because I'm looking like such a mega stoner right now. But
Evan, you had one job.
I know, you had one job. Make us look like professionals.
Promote the company, damn it.
Nobody's going to buy this now. So
we got so you've graduated to the level of bong water.
But what happened though was the experience of the effect was something unlike the tincture. It was unlike taking the tincture with the coffee. It was unique and it was awesome. Like, with the way we described it, that what Ben sort of noted was when you take a sip of the infused coffee, we didn't notice at the time, but what happens is the warm beverage opens up your salivary glands up in your cheeks and under your tongue. And when they're opened because of their exposure to warm liquid, they absorb more readily. So you were getting a little bit of sublingual absorption in the coffee. So a little bit of the effect hit like that. And the way he described it was, you can't take a sip of this coffee and not just have a little smile.
Nice.
And so that was enough to keep us going. And the process changed and changed and changed. We tried soaking beans. We changed how we were making the infusion medium. We started getting away from the soaking and the spraying. And eventually at one point, I mean, we got to the point where the infusion was a 3-step process involving a vacuum and freezing and like all sorts of crazy nonsense. When we launched the company, it took 3 hours a pound to make our coffee.
And this is still all in the house that you're sharing. This is still all in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Repurposed. Yep. To do all this experimenting. Okay.
Totally.
Got it.
And so what we did is we had friends we would give the coffee to. You know, there was no testing at this point. Like if you wanted to test your product, you had to have a mix. So without so our testing was giving it away and getting feedback. And so we had one friend in particular, a guy named Robbie Waldeck, who I would give the most of the coffee to. He was my blessed and cursed guinea pig because he got a lot of really good coffee and he got a lot of really bad coffee. And I didn't give him the worst ones. Like the worst coffee that we ever made was, you know how people like ghetto blast their own shatter by like getting a tube full of flour and then putting a butane canister on top, blasting that through and then recollecting what comes out. Like we did that in the coffee beans. Like a tray of coffee beans, we dumped butane and hash into, and then didn't purge it very well. And like, I drank that one. And what do you know? Race to the bathroom again.
What do you know? In the hospital.
So he didn't get the worst
3 days.
But he did. But we did one day. So I would get the feedback from him. And usually what he would say was either the coffee tastes really good and does nothing, or it tastes really bad and does something. And we dialed in. And this took almost a year of just that. Just, okay, you know.
And is this is all weed or CBD at this point?
This is still weed. We, the CBD market, I wasn't totally aware of yet. And it wasn't, I mean, you had some of your early companies like Charlotte's Web and like, you know, some others, but there was no market really for CBD, and CBD was not something your average Joe or even someone in the marijuana industry would be super aware of. I guess people in the marijuana industry were, but like one-to-ones were not a thing yet. So CBD really didn't have anything going on for it yet. And one day I got a call from Robbie and he said, so I drank the whole French press this morning and it was delicious. Then I got to my shop and was so high, I realized I left my shop keys at home. So I rode my bike back home and realized I was so high, I left my house key stuck in the door at my shop. So I say this one worked.
Like we struck gold. Then we knew.
Number 40152. Check.
Yeah.
Wow. And then
that's funny.
And that was when
it's kind of like Dr. Hoffman riding his bike home after discovering LSD.
Yeah, exactly. He's riding around town.
Oh dear. What is happening now?
Well, and early in the experimentation process, we were very clear, like drink 1 cup, wait an hour. If you want, drink another cup and see. But by then, he sort of knew if the coffee didn't taste like bong water, it wasn't going to affect him, so he drank the whole French press. And that's when we started looking into, okay, now we have a product that I feel pretty good about. But then we started looking at the cost of getting into the THC market, and at that point, it was, you know, we ballparked it at 1.2, 1.3 million just to, like, start. I'd never raised money before. I mean, I had worked as an independent contracting painter, so I knew the very, very, very basics of sort of running your own business, but nothing like this. And so really quickly, we were just like, well, this isn't gonna go anywhere. And then at that time, Ben stepped out and went and got and started and entered a master's program at BU. And I kept tinkering with this, but with sort of diminished hopes. And that's when CBD came on the radar for us. Another friend of mine was talking to me about
you'd sort of almost quit the project then, it sounds like. So Ben goes off to do his own thing at Denver University and you're
Denver,
I mean.
Yeah. And then I picked up another partner for a little while, it was sort of an interesting thing. So what happened was, is I started that. So what happened? There was a couple things that happened. First, what happened was somebody, a friend was like, well, what, have you ever tried high CBD strains for your back? Like, because I was still experiencing the back problems. At this point, I had healed enough that I could take a really low dose of the THC tincture and still be functional, but still kind of woohoo. And he said, well, why don't you try, high CBD for your back? And I was like, isn't CBD like male weed plants or something? Like one of the many fallacies about CBD. And he was like, no, it's, it's non-psychoactive, it's this and that. So I started looking into it and was like, how have I never heard of this before? And at the time I could only get CBD oil from like one company online. It was super shady and it was real nasty and waxy and, but it still worked. Like my back felt great because I first just took it as a tincture. My back felt great and I wasn't high at all. And then we started infusing it into the coffee and it was like, oh, this makes sense now. Suddenly the game changes because there's something that not a lot of people know about, but I think this is a really good tip for people considering starting any sort of food business. Is there's something called the Cottage Foods Act, which allows you to produce food for sale commercially in your own kitchen without the supervision of the FDA, so long as like you can't do more than like $4,000 in sales in like a month or something like that. I don't remember the restrictions, and you have to have the right label that says the FDA didn't have their hand in this, but it allows you to legally produce food products without a commercial kitchen. And so we started, and so then what happened was, now we're looking at, this is sort of, this was all of 2014, most of 2015. Then at the end of 2015, I had a new partner named Jason, and we started the LLC, Steve Hughes, and really quick, but we weren't selling anything. We existed, but there was no market for this. And really quickly, the partnership just wasn't going very well. Like we didn't jive the right way. And so he left, and actually Ben finished his program, got his degree. And then in early 2016, or actually late 2016, excuse me, end of 2016, he came back on because he had gotten his degree. He had good job prospects, but wasn't super keen on that path. And the fact that we switched from THC to CBD made him feel a lot more comfortable. And the CBD market was starting to spring up then. The most common question we would get from people when we would be out and about would be, hey, we infuse CBD into coffee. They'd be like, what's CBD? And so we had to explain it again and again and again. And it didn't get us a lot of sales, but we started working our way into the community. And at that time, there was no hemp community, weed community. It was just the weed cannabis community. And an organization called Women Grow was the first cannabis community to be like, this sounds cool. Why don't you guys come to one of our events, meet everybody, sample your stuff out. And so we went there, we met with some just amazing people, some awesome women who were really excited, really helpful. And we realized like what a cool grassroots community there really was. And so we started getting a lot of sort of local recognition because we would show up to everything. Like that was the biggest key, was we weren't selling a lot, but we always showed up and we always had coffee and we just gave it away to anybody who would try it. While slowly depleting my savings. Then we got our first wholesale account that we started doing some white labeling for. So we were producing 100 pounds of coffee a month to ship to them in bulk that they would resell under their own name. And that started bringing in some revenue, and it wasn't much. And I guess it was more like streams. Yeah, and it was supposed to be 100 pounds a month, but I think it ended up being, and in real life, becoming like 100 pounds every like 3 months. So
Okay.
not a lot of coffee. And we were charging them next to nothing for it. But when we launched, a 1 pound bag of our coffee sold for $90.
Wow.
And it was still a loss to sell it at that because it took 3 hours to make.
Still a lot. This cupcake cost $200,000.
Exactly.
And we still
like,
couldn't turn a profit.
Well, and you can see it. You'd be talking to somebody, they'd be interested, and they'd be like, well, that's awesome. Well, how much is a bag?
How much is a bag?
And
oh,
like,
no.
Well, that's the bag.
Oh, it's a disaster.
$90.
How much is in your life savings?
Mm-hmm.
Yikes. Okay. So yeah, you're doing the local circuit. You're showing up at tents. You're taking it a loss. You're bringing coffee, and from what I remember, you're doing this. You're bringing like jugs of brewed coffee in addition to selling the bags, right? You're saying, hey, stop by. People can smell the coffee in the air. Here, have a cup. Try this out. And at this point, it's pure CBD, right?
Yep, we had totally switched to CBD because we could operate legally in that market,
Okay.
and we dealt with. I don't need to get too into the specifics. This is a long road of some of the problems we dealt with in terms of things that people might be aware of, if problems the CBD industry has dealt with in terms of regulation. The biggest nightmare for us was credit card processing. We couldn't, it was impossible to run credit to charge people's credit cards. No merchant processors wanted to touch us. So what we dipped into was this really interesting mix of opportunity and major disadvantage by being in an industry this size. What I think our huge advantage was we had so much time to learn. We were 2 steps ahead of the industry. Most people were figuring out what the hell CBD is, and we're trying to explain CBD coffee and the combined effects.
Right.
And so, which made it impossible to sell. But it gave us a lot of time to learn, and it gave us a lot of time to give a ton of brewed coffee away and to get it was cool. We kind of developed a cult following in the cannabis community, because everybody started to know us because we showed up to every event. And as we progressed, I think it was 2017, for 6 months, I averaged 2 events a week myself.
Good.
And so great for the recognition, just cash drain, like you can, So at this point, I've wiped out my own savings. Started to have my wife, my girlfriend at the time, even worse. Same person, Emily, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, started having to pay my rent. I had maxed out. I started maxing out credit cards, started borrowing money, started really digging into a hole. And I think there's an interesting, someone once worded it to me really interestingly, that you can only look so far over the edge of a cliff before gravity takes over and you're going. And so that's kind of what it felt like. Was even if I wanted to stop at that point, I don't think I could have, because everybody was rooting for us. People were willing to help us and to loan me money. And actually, I quit the painting thing and I started working at a travel company. And I remember when I decided that I was going to do Steep Fuse full time, or I was just chewing on that idea, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to do this. And I told my boss at the travel company, so I think, I'm starting to get ready for this transition. I want to give you guys plenty of heads up that I'll probably be putting in my 2 weeks notice at some point in the not too distant future. So if you want to start looking for my replacement. And then that afternoon, they announced that I had given my 2 weeks notice and I was out. It's okay, well, to be fair, I did spend a lot of time at work working on coffee stuff. So,
all right, so you're quitting you quit. You're committed to the. I mean, you're really pot committed at this point, is what we're hearing.
Yeah.
You know,
so
finance is gone. You've taken on other people's money. You've now, whether you wanted to or not, your job is no more. So there really is no other option. I mean, you have burned the boats at this point.
Yeah. And I hadn't taken in any money in terms of for the business. I personally had borrowed money from friends and family to just try to keep myself afloat. The business was super duper cash negative.
Okay.
And so we got to the point where we launched. So then, later in 2016 was when we started selling online. And that was when we started to see a little, a trickle of revenue coming in, not nearly enough, but just barely enough. And like the feedback we were getting was what really kept us going. We weren't selling enough for this to make sense. But the people who were buying it, like our customer retention rate was like 80%. Like if you bought it once, you were almost for sure going to keep buying it. And a lot of people, the price was an issue, but a lot of people, what was really cool, were telling us, you ruined coffee for me. Like now that I've drank infused coffee for a month, I go back to regular coffee and I realize that I feel jittery. I realize that there's some impacts of anxiety on me. And because I guess, that's the thing that we haven't even really talked about is sort of the targeted effect. Because I didn't want to just come onto the show and pitch the coffee,
Right.
But really, what we were going for is the infusion is really great for mitigating the rough edges that come with coffee. So, you drink too much coffee in an empty stomach, that can give you acid belly. That gets leveled out really nicely. The anxiety is totally reduced. And then the jittery, like, you're on cup 4. You're like, I'm not any more awake. I just feel more unpleasant.
Right. That's
just gone. Like, that's amazing. Like, if anything, if nothing else, it allows you to drink a lot more coffee.
True.
And I was drinking, and during the development of the infusion process, I drank so much coffee that I started getting severe anxiety attacks and panic attacks. And I had to quit drinking coffee for like 6 months. But they were bad. Like I'd get one, I'd be at work, I'd get a full blown panic attack and I'd have to leave on my lunch break, like clock out for lunch and go.
Yikes.
I'd just hide in the back of my car. Like, and think about how I'm starting this wackadoo business in this non-existent industry, digging myself deeper into debt.
Oh, man. Sounds like fun
and the
times.
The coffee itself was making my anxiety worse.
Yeah.
Oh,
the irony.
But and that was more in the 2015. By 2016, we had all the kinks worked out, and still not making any money. But
Well, I do remember. I don't remember when you sent me a batch at some point, and I hadn't really. The CBD wave was really new. It was, it was kind of like the beginning wave. Now it's in every Walmart, every Walgreens, CVS that you could find pretty much, and every kind of salve and balm or whatever. But so I didn't really know what CBD did, but I think one of the first batches that you sent, I tried it, and it was really interesting because I had to go to something that I really needed to be mentally present for. I think it was like a taping of Pensado's place or like something that I wanted to be myself and have adequate brain power. So I drank this coffee. I wasn't really thinking about it, and I drove there. And when I was there, I felt different, but not in a way that you would describe as high or messed up. It was just like, it was a very unique feeling. It was really just a body feeling. My mental faculties were all 100% there. I was totally clear-headed, but there was some kind of, I want to say like tingling in the body or just some sort of sense of like, oh, something is going on inside me, but I don't exactly know what it is. It was very unusual, but very pleasant. It was nice.
Totally. And that's exactly what you're going for. And that's actually something else that makes CBD in general. It's a really hard product to sell in 2 ways in that respect. One is that the FDA won't let you talk about what it does. And number 2, it's like trying to sell weed to people and explaining to them that they will not feel high.
Right.
So many people were like, well, then why would I buy this?
Right. Well, you got people on both sides. You know, you've got like the people who are totally against it and the people who just want to be high all day. And like there's very little overlap of people who are understanding like, okay, no, I want some of the properties of this plant, but not some other properties.
Exactly. And, you know, there was more research coming out, and getting into 2017 is sort of when the CBD bubble started to inflate. You know, Charlotte's Web got like Sanjay Gupta did a piece on Charlotte's Web and stuff about epileptic seizures was coming out. Epidiolex was getting into the works, and suddenly it went from nobody having a clue what this was to it being in everything. And like
everything.
Late 2017 coming into 2018, it was embarrassing. It went from being this cool niche industry that everybody was suddenly interested in to being part of this circus that everybody had thrown their rat into the rat race. And CBD yoga pants, CBD cotton candy, CBD pillows, just the most ridiculous shit you could think of. Oh, am I allowed to curse? Should I?
Yes, you can. That's what the explicit tag is for.
There we go. I guess we have been talking about weed a lot of this, so.
Yeah, the show's already canceled anyway.
There we go.
All right, so but like, are you still working out of the kitchen at this time, or have you moved on to other facilities? Now I'm assuming you've changed the methodology drastically.
Yeah. So what we were at this point was we were still in. What we did was Ben moved out because we were not going to work together and live together. Like somebody would be dead by now. And what we did is we converted the basement where we had used to use as the grow part of the house, converted that into sort of the kitchen, if you will. So it wasn't FDA registered. We were still operating under the Cottage Foods Act, but we made it, you know, into it would have met all. It weren't not in a house. It would have passed an FDA inspection. And so we had a dedicated space, and we could do at this point about 100 pounds in a day. If both of us worked all day, we could do about 100 pounds.
That sounds like a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot more, but it took up a lot of space, and it just zapped a lot of time. Still, it was way better than 3 hours a pound like we were before. You know, now we were about 10 pounds an hour. I'd say 12 pounds an hour.
Yeah.
This is when, and the money was really, really running out.
Yeah.
But what had changed was we didn't have to explain to everybody what the hell CBD was anymore. And even though there was all these novelty products that just, you know, CBD and everything, the idea, the combo of CBD and coffee still stood. Like some people were very confused about, well, you know, CBD is a downer, caffeine's an upper. Like, how does that work? And we were explaining, no, you know, CBD isn't actually a downer at higher doses. And for some people, it can make you sleepy, but mostly it's a neuromodulator. Like, it helps keep your body in balance. And so caffeine tries to pull your body out of balance. And the way we describe it was, instead of like a peak and crash, it was rise and plateau. And it stood out enough and there was enough of a market, there was enough of an industry. And we were actually, by 2017, we were starting to sell. We were by no means cash positive, but we were starting to sell. You know, we were certainly into I think in 2017, we maybe sold like $30,000 worth of coffee.
Wow,
so it wasn't a lot, especially when you consider two people working full time, but it wasn't nothing in a blooming industry. And so that was when we got to the point where we're like, well, okay, we need to level up if we're going to keep doing this. Like now we need to take the next
You got to get
plunge.
serious. Yeah.
Yep. And so that means we got to get out of the basement and we need somebody else's money to do it. So that became a whole new little circus of figuring out how to raise money as a startup. And fortunately, sites like Kickstarter, GoFundMe, whatever, had really made investing in a startup in its own way a trendy thing. Like people are like, oh yeah, I'm invested in this startup, and so we had like trendy CBD. Investing in startups was kind of trendy, and I've been keeping my eye on interested parties for a long time. And so we went out, we basically learned how to raise money, and realized that we were so broke we couldn't even set up to take proper investment. Like we couldn't even structure correctly to take real investment. But what we did was we got convertible note loans. And I'm sure you know what this is, but for people who don't, a convertible note loan is a fantastic way to get a business off the ground. Because what it is you take a loan. Pretty simple paperwork. We didn't even have a lawyer. I wrote the agreement. And what that is people give you money and you give them the note, which is the note of debt. And the note can either be repaid with interest or converted into ownership at a certain period in time. So like the way ours was set up was in 2 years, they would automatically convert. Or if we did a Series A where we actually did a full funding round, they would convert. Or at least they would have to choose at that point if they wanted to start getting paid back or convert. And you create all these incentives, like, if the share price is $1 a piece, you get, 80 cents per share. So you get 20% bonus, or a 20% discount on your share price.
Right.
And, we were able to raise, it was in the first, we kind of kept that open for into 2018. So from end of 2017 into 2018, we were able to raise just enough that we could get into a facility, like the cheapest shack in Boulder that was eligible to be certified as a kitchen. Actually, the same facility that Justin's Nut Butter started out of, which is kind of funny.
No way.
Yeah.
That butter that is, inexplicably, you want to talk about $90 for a jar of peanut butter. I hope it's like, well, I could get one jar of peanut butter for $3.99 or this one for $18.99.
Yeah, exactly. So there was some good juice.
I don't know if it's worth it, but yeah, I'm not sure, but it seems to work for them. They're everywhere.
Yeah. So, so we got into a spot, moved out of the basement, and Ben and I were able to start taking a super duper low salary, enough to, I wasn't able to start paying any of my bills off, but on my debt off, but I was able to stop accumulating more and sort of, I guess I could start making the minimum payment. So we just raised enough to keep our heads above water. And then that was at the end of 2017 going into 2018. And 2018 was a pretty cool year. We were really well known around the industry. I think in 2018, we maybe did like 90K. So it was 3x growth on the previous year without a ton of investment. So that's pretty damn good. We'd also been able to lower the price of the coffee a ton. So we were down to, I think we were like $50 for a pound at that point, which is still an expensive bag of coffee, but it wasn't $90. And now there was a metric to base on, because a disadvantage we had as a coffee company, that companies that were doing tinctures, capsules, your more basic products, is there was this market for them at an expected price. If you want this little bottle, that's $90. It's just the way it works. And people knew that. So all the tinctures were $90, where people are like, but why is this bag of coffee $50 when all of these bags of coffee are $15? And it's like, well, if you think about the amount of CBD that's in this coffee, really you're saving money by buying infused coffee as opposed to buying coffee and tincture. And so we still had that disadvantage of it, trying to have to explain ourselves out of coffee and into CBD. But there was at least a metric when we were like, well, how much would you spend on I think we were putting, our strength bounced around a little bit. I think we were 450 milligrams a pound at that point. It's like, if you were to buy a 500 milligram bottle of tincture and a bag of coffee, what would you spend? And this is where the crazy twist of fate came in. We were growing, we were doing okay.
Yeah.
Our growth was actually, it was a hard industry, but our growth was looking good. But we had a really interesting encounter. So our roaster, I guess that's part of the story that we haven't covered, is the guy who started roasting our coffee. We were not roasting our coffee. Like, I quit roasting the coffee very early in 2016. I was on the phone one day with, I want to say, a hemp farmer, somebody, and I was talking about coffee. And I just hear this voice shout at me, "Hey man, you in the coffee business?" I'm in my backyard, and what the hell? And it turns out a neighbor who lived kitty corner to my backyard, whose yard I couldn't see because of overgrown shrubs, was a guy named Jerry Leary, who is a congenitally blind master coffee roaster. Mm-hmm. He roasts entirely by sense of smell. He's a coffee wizard, and he happened to be living next door to me the whole damn time.
That's such a cool story.
He is one of the most phenomenal human beings you will ever encounter. I would strongly recommend listeners check him out. It's Unseen Bean. He doesn't roast our coffee anymore, but he's a super cool guy, super cool story, super good coffee. Cool. And so he started roasting for us, and his shop was
it's getting steadily more serious, steadily more professional.
And I'm kind of backtracking, because that did happen in 2016. He was still roasting with us up to this point.
Right.
And so what happened was, one day he calls me and says, "Hey, Devin, do you guys have any coffee? I've got a customer coming over to my house to pick up a bag." I was like, "Yeah, sure. We can do that." And he goes, "Okay, great." She sounded really stressed about this. I was like, "All right." Yeah, no problem. So we go over to Jerry's house. We get over and he's like, "You guys want to smoke a joint?" Sure. So we're hanging out at Jerry's, smoking a joint. The door rings, and he's like, or the bell rings. He's like, "I'll be right back." And he goes down. I hear him talking to somebody. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, I mean, the guys who make it are here. Do you want to meet them?" I'm like, "Well, this is professional."
Yeah, exactly.
And so this girl comes up. Her name is Nicole, and we're talking, and I can see that she's got an MED badge, and the Marijuana Enforcement Division badge that you get if you work in the cannabis industry, in the weed side. And it's flipped around, so I can't see who any of the info, but I can see. Actually, I don't know if they're company specific. I don't remember. I recognize the badge, and I was like, "Oh, who are you with? Who do you? I see you've got the badge." And she goes, "Oh, I'm with Willie's Reserve." And Willie's Reserve is Willie Nelson's weed company that launched in 2015. Super cool company. We'd encountered them at some trade shows before. We'd met a few of their members and had talked to them a little bit and just been like, "Oh man, what if only." And she's like, "Oh, I work for Willie's Reserve, and this coffee's for Annie." We're like, "Annie? Annie who?" She goes, "Annie Nelson." And Ben goes, "Oh, we've had an Annie Nelson who's been buying coffee for us since 2016. She was like our third customer. She's cool."
I mean, I even remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that order.
At $90 a pound, when if we sold 2 pounds, it was a great week. And then occasionally this woman named Annie Nelson would buy 5 pounds, 10 pounds, and ship it to LA, to Maui, to Austin, all over the place.
Right.
Just this saint that was generating a quarter or half of all of our revenue. And he was like, "Yeah, I remember. We have a person named Annie Nelson." And then Nicole is like, "Annie Nelson, as in Willie Nelson's wife. She's been buying the coffee for him for years." And it was just
day one. Whoa, yeah.
You
never know what kind of effect you're gonna have.
And she's and I need this coffee because I'm flying out to South by Southwest in 2 hours. And Annie Nelson said I had to bring her a bag. And it was just like,
story.
Are you kidding me? And so we started, and you know, we ended up getting a connection with them and started realizing that some other people we had met at events. One guy in particular, a guy named Ryan West. Annie had been sending him as a ghost buyer to our booths at these different events. And we didn't know who he was. We didn't know where he was connected in the industry, but we knew he was in the industry because he knew too many smart questions. Like he grilled us on really hard questions when other people were like, what's CBD? And turns out he was like scoping us and ghost buying for like 2 years. And so what ended up happening is, so nothing kind of came of that for a while. You know, we thought it was super cool. We'd see an order from Annie and be like, oh, awesome. How you guys doing? Like, we don't actually know you, but whatever. And then around July, August of 2018, one of their founders, or Nicole or Ryan, one of them gets in touch with us and says one of the founders wants to come chat. And we met Elizabeth Hogan, who's one of the co-founders of Willie's Reserve. And she came out and started asking us about, they were telling us that they were looking at getting into the hemp space and that Annie loved the coffee and wanted our coffee to be their flagship product.
Wow.
And you can imagine we are over the moon. Like we could be making Willie Nelson's
when you're starting a weed company. I mean, it's everybody's pipe dream to start a weed company and sell it to Willie Nelson, right? like sure,
well,
like meet this at a dinner party. Yeah,
exactly.
Like I started a weed company and then I sold it to Willie Nelson, sure, right? And Snoop Dogg was right after him. Right?
Well,
I'm selling protein shakes to The Rock.
Yeah, exactly. And so we were just about to do our second round of financing to bring in some more money to expand to the next level. And we were like, well, this could be great. Maybe they could invest a little, or at least like if we're making this coffee, any investor is going to want to get in on this. And then we got to meet, and then we met one day, the CEO, a guy named Andrew Davison, came out and met us. And we were talking to him. He was a nice guy. We met with him a couple times, and then he basically said, look, I'll be frank with you. We're not interested in investing in you, but we would like to buy you. We would like to acquire you. Okay. And at the time, I was really like,
What's the timeline on this? What time is that?
So this is still mid 2018. We're sort of getting into fall of late summer, getting into fall of 2018. Once we met Elizabeth in earlier summer, we got into fall, and that's when we met Andrew, and the thing started rolling. And at first, I was super against it. Like, we worked so hard, like we're just taking off, and I want, I don't want to go work for somebody else now. But and like a celebrity brand, like it's super cool until you're like, most celebrity brands are bullshit products with a celebrity's face slapped on the front and a $10 upcharge.
And this is no different, folks. And this is exactly the same.
Thank God no one listens to this podcast.
That's true, yeah. My mom's like, hey! As he spits it out.
Willie's sitting in his chair like, God damn it.
I knew it. It was a bad idea.
Well, so, they started betting us. We started betting them. And it was super cool to be like, no, these guys, like, so I tried some Reserve products. And I mean, it is top shelf. It is fire.
Sure.
And
you'd expect, I suppose.
As we started to work with them more, we realized that they are super, super, super duper quality focused. I mean, hell, like they literally vetted us for 2 years before they even talked to us. And Annie is, I mean, they're also super involved in the company. You know, a lot of places, you know, the celebrity gets his check every month and that's about it. Annie and Willie are really involved. Willie's technically listed as the CTO, the chief tasting officer. But everything that's all new products have to get approved by them and get, you know, work with them. And so, they actually, that year, and then so we started talking with them. We decided, yep, you know what, this is a good fit. And I was still hesitant, but we had an advisor at the time, a guy named Alan Murray, who was the CEO of Next Foods. So Next Foods, the guys who started White Wave Tofu and Silk Milk, like non-dairy milk, they sold that company for like $1 billion. And then Next Foods was the next company they started. And that's the company that makes Good Belly, the probiotic juice. And their CEO, Alan Murray, we had met, and he was an advisor to us. So this like knows the ins and outs of the natural food game like nobody else. And he made a really good analogy. When we were talking to him, he said, look, guys, I came on board because I believe in you 100%. Like I wouldn't have done this if I didn't. But something you should think about is that this CBD game is a 1,000-horse race. And by the end, the racetrack is going to look like a battlefield with dead horses and corpses strewn out as far as you can see. Because 1,000 horses are going to start, and 20 are going to survive, and 3 are going to win. And this is an opportunity to hitch your wagon to a horse that has a really good shot at being one of the 20. Time will tell if it's one of the 3, but it's got a really good shot at being one of the 20. And you like the people, we fit. Like during 2000, we basically then spent all of 2019 like negotiating, investigating, due diligence, closing. And during that time, they're like, why don't you come out to Austin and go on tour with us for a couple of days? and like, can I bring my wife?
From brewing some beans in the kitchen, from burning beans in the kitchen to touring with Willie Nelson. Again, this stuff boggles the mind. I think that's a pretty unusual story right there. As they go, I don't know, maybe our listeners will disagree, but I'd qualify that as a fairly unusual thing.
I mean, your venture capitalists would call, like, you know, the gold standard of starting a business is your 3 and out. You invest, build for 3 years, then sell. Like between when we launched officially in 2016 when we decided to sell in 2019, it was almost that.
And lest we forget, the paperwork is done. The deal is done just before COVID hits.
That
you want to talk about timing? Like, I mean, what does that even look like miraculous. 6 months later, 8 months later, you know?
I don't even.
In this crazy chaos of a world that we find ourselves.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, where
trade shows have all but stopped.
Yeah. And that's the thing is we didn't win on sales. Where we sort of won, if you will, was we always showed up and it was product first, and we showed up for everything. And that period where we were digging ourselves deeper and deeper into a hole is when we solidified, like when Annie's ghost buyers were like, no, these guys, none of the questions stump them. The product stands up every time. They show up every time. And so then it was the showing up. It was like the worst business decisions we were making in terms of going to every event and just giving away thousands of dollars of coffee was really what made us successful. And in a way, our most powerful weapon was our blithering ignorance about business and the market, like never realizing how screwed we were at any given moment. It's like, you know, the road runner runs off the cliff and he never looks down, so he makes it to the other side.
Yeah.
And then Wile E. Coyote takes a look and then immediately drops.
Yep.
I feel like it was like the road runner. And, you know, so people know, this was not a big payout exit. You know, I don't live in an island now. We work with Willie's Remedy, which is the CBD branch. So Reserve does THC, Remedy does CBD. And we work with Remedy. I do product development, Ben's an operations manager. We love working with the company, but they're still very small in their own right. You know, we work with, in the Remedy side, we work with like a 10-person team. You know, I still show up and do demos at stores. Like even now during COVID, like I go up to we mask up and go stand outside of stores demoing out coffee like the old days, except now we got a way cooler booth and Willie Nelson on it instead of like on the other side grilling us. So there's still a long way to go. And I think of it as, you know, by no means an exit, but just the next plunge that we've taken. But it's been wild. And I think, you know, it'd be cool to follow up sometime, you know, another year down the road or whatever. Because I think one thing that's really interesting for us is, we never imagined this could happen. Certainly not this quickly. Like I imagined maybe someday we could sell the business, but I didn't. I was ready to run CPUs for the rest of my life, assuming it made money.
Yeah.
And
the rest of my life, I had about three months to live. It wasn't going to be very long.
Nope. And then, but we had no idea that we would have been successful quickly and not considering that as even a remote possibility.
Yeah.
It was interesting. You look back at some of the mistakes you know, everybody would go back and like, if I could do this different, if I could do that different. And it's funny that the biggest mistake we made was still not being confident enough in ourselves in some of the way, like, and realizing that something like this could happen this quickly. I mean, this is obviously sort of like the shoot the moon scenario, but, you know, we didn't structure our initial loans thinking there was any way we were going to sell in a few years. We didn't give out equity assuming we were going to go. So, you know, we did ourselves a lot of disservices in not assuming that anything like this could happen quickly. And then it turns out that the really, really, really good shit can happen really, really quickly.
That's awesome.
If you're willing to go that all in.
So cool, man. Well, I think it's a great story. I think at this point, you know, I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff that we'll cover, I'm sure, another day. We can talk for hours and hours. Obviously, I think it's a really cool story, but let's go into some rapid fire. All right. Some rapid fire shit to close it out. So, first thing is, all right, so somebody out there who is considering starting a product-based business, in any industry, number one lesson learned or advice?
Start small and start simple. One thing that we did is really early on, we already had this cool product of coffee and CBD, but for a long time we were putting orange peel and ginger and other flavors and trying to go so big. And what I would say is keep it simple and focus on the piece that you are really good at, the thing that makes you different. The best part of your product, the best part of your company, put 90% of your effort into that 1% of your business.
Yep, that's great. And I think a lot of other people, you know, again, we're just going to rapid fire this. So how did you find your niche? I mean, I think you kind of hit on it, but you've told me in private there was another element that I'm trying to draw out from you from this question.
Another element?
Do you remember how you phrased it to me once?
Oh, no, I don't.
Because I said, how did you come up with the CBD plus coffee? And you gave me a real cynical answer at some point in the process.
Oh, God,
This could have been years ago, though.
It probably was, because, you know, I'm so used to the answer.
It started with you doing some research. Yeah, but it was, you're like, I did some research. I looked online and I found the two, I'll just fill it in. Like, I did the two.
No. Well, yeah, that coffee is the oldest form of cannabis ingestion on record in Western history. That?
No, but that's great too. That's not what I remember. But
because what I was going to say,
I just remember you saying something like, "Coffee is one of the most popular things in the world. This is going to be one of the most popular things in the world. So combine them both together, and you have a really popular thing." I don't know when you said that. This was like really early in the process.
Well, so there was two pieces there, and one of it was I started looking up. Yeah, I was looking up the most traded commodities in the world.
Right? Yeah. What is the most traded?
Coffee, illegal substances. And I was like, well, if you mix number 2 and number 3, maybe you can mix number 1.
That's exactly. That stuck with me. I mean, that could have been 4 years ago, easy, but that I've never forgotten that just because it made me laugh.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, that's definitely.
That's so funny. But I like the fact that it was the oldest known way of ingesting ketamine. I mean, that's fascinating right there. That's a great factoid.
If people want to learn more about that, look up the Club des Hashishans. It was a club in Paris where famous French romantic artists and authors would meet and drink hash-laced coffee, get high as shit, have feasts and these giant debaucherous parties, and God, what a time to be alive.
Yeah, exactly, right. That's like a midnight in Paris, right?
Yeah, like Voltaire, Alexandre Dumas, people you know.
Oh, like prior, yeah. Wow. Have you ever experienced burnout so far?
Oh yeah. I think Ben dealt with it more than me because he was in ops, and I think that the key to dealing with burnout and one big thing I would advise anybody who's starting a business is this shit is so hard. Everybody should try to have a partner. You read about the Mark Zuckerberg, the sole head guy, does it all, builds a thing. But if you're trying to produce an actual product that's not just purely digital, I think one of the most important things that has really made us survive is the dynamic between partners, and having one partner be really good at this and one partner be really good at that, because in hard times, somebody's always going to be burned out, I don't want to say always. That sounds a little, cynical maybe, but when you're going through hard times, if you've got two people who are in it together and who focus on different elements of the business, somebody is usually able to keep the enthusiasm going when the other person feels really beaten down. And a way I describe it for Ben and I was that if our business was a ship, Ben is the anchor and I'm the sail. If it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for me, he'd still be sitting at the dock. If it wasn't for him, I'd be blown out to sea.
Right.
And he's really good at running the operations, keeping the trains running on time. And I am developing the next thing. And that combination really helps fight the burnout. If I'm hitting a wall on development, but he's like, yeah, we're cranking through product, or if he's just so beaten down by how backordered we are. And I'm like, but the next thing is just hit this.
Yeah.
Sure. You can avoid burnout really, really well with a partner. I mean, I know a lot of incubator programs that will not take sole proprietorships into their program. You have to have a partner.
Makes sense. All right, so we're going to end it on this note. Who would be better at making CBD coffee? The Backstreet Boys or NSYNC?
Yes. I would have to go with NSYNC. But I don't know why.
But I don't know why. That's a hell of an ending. And that's our show, folks. Thank you, Devin.
Well, whatever followers you did have, I think I just got rid of. So